Last year I made a video on The Evil Within 1 and how it was misunderstood as a game and how it was meant to be a love letter to the horror genre as a whole. If you haven't seen that video yet, of course you are welcome right now to go see that video and then come back, or of course vice versa and go see this one first and then go to that one. In that video I briefly talk about the sequel and how it has a moment where Sebastian must defeat a monster from the first game, and how it almost felt like a social commentary on the state of the horror genre and how to say goodbye to all its tropes. The Evil Within 1 was received with mixed reception due to its pacing and undeciding whether or not it wanted to be a fast-paced action horror game or an item management survival horror. Of course, if you're going to try and blend these two together, there's going to be complications. And the game was also a personal journey into a director's mind, trying to understand what his inspirations are and why he loves the genre so much. But unfortunately, this did more damage than good for Mikami's reputation. Many fans have a clear image of what to expect from his games and people want it to be that clear-cut way. But what fans felt like they got instead was a big disappointment because it didn't live up to the image that they had of this perfect director. It almost seemed impossible to think we would ever get a sequel to The Evil Within 1 because of the reception it got. But instead, Tango Games didn't give up and they went at it, and they gave us a story about growth and learning from our mistakes of the past. There is symbology of redemption, acceptance, and of course finding identity throughout this whole game, and I would love you all to join me as we dive into STEM just for another round. This game opens up with Sebastian's having dreams about trying to save his daughter from a burning house. We see a man drunk and alone, a shell of his former detective self from the first game. He's informed by Kidman at this point that his daughter may actually still be alive, and there's a chance that he could go ahead and save her. Sebastian of course is willing to take the risk and agrees to all the terms to this mission. He's then thrown back into STEM, and that's how our story begins. To be able to create a safe zone for Sebastian to constantly go back to, the STEM system must go through his mind and work out what he considers safe. But by doing this, he's also confronted with his traumas and what happened with his daughter constantly while in this void of STEM. And while alone in this isolated void, we see him running towards his home just one more time as it catches on fire, and then we also get reminded of the beacon incident from the first Evil Within game, showing that these events strongly linger on his mind and definitely are the first thing that comes to his mind when the STEM is searching for somewhere where he considers safe. When the STEM system is able to work out what he considers a safe zone, we realise that it's his old office when he was a detective, and this was before he lost his daughter, and most importantly, before he lost his wife. By going through his memories, we also get to see what happened to him in the past. There is a moment where we get to see Lily playing on the floor, and she has two dolls, and she comes up to Sebastian and says,
"My doll's head is broke."
And this doll looks exactly like Sebastian from the first game. This tells us that this is Sebastian himself. This is symbolic of him being broken, and he tells Lily to give it to his wife because she's able to fix him. She's his everything, and he relies on her to be able to sort out his problems. And without Lily being around and without Myra, his wife, being around, he just feels like a broken man. You may think it's just a throwaway reference or line, but trust me, this doll will come back later on, but we'll get to that part when it comes around. Very much like the first game, there is also three main antagonists throughout this game, and they all play a significant part in Sebastian's journey, but they also all embody something that's very important to the genre as a whole. Stefano, an insane artist, a man who used to take pictures during the war but was hurt during combat. He's been given powers to be able to torture and trap people in their final moments of death, and he's the pure representation of holding on to the present. Father Theodore, a manipulating priest who has the power to control people through their worst fears and also their wants. He's given this power and is able to create his own cult, and he represents holding on to the past. And finally you have Myra, Sebastian's wife, who wants to save Lily just as much as he does, but instead she wants to hold her as a child and keep her innocence, make sure she's never hurt and make sure she grows up in union so she can never feel fear again. She represents the future that Sebastian needs, and most of all, that Sebastian wants. There is a radical change that happened in this game which actually changes the whole entire tone of the story itself. Shinji Mikami is out of the director's chair and instead has given a chance for a newcomer, John Jonas, to take over. And of course there's new references and new nods which all relate to this director as a whole, and he shows us what inspired him. From the red curtain imagery of The Cell, and even this red curtain imagery could also represent the likes of Twin Peaks, but there's also another Twin Peaks nod in here as well. Sebastian is able to use a coffee machine so him himself can enjoy a damn fine cup of coffee. We also see the shining carpet but used as wallpaper, and of course you can't forget the use of the Mama inspired scene with the anima, which actually replicates the movie scene identically. We're seeing a field of new inspirations which are definitely a lot more western this time around, but instead of being a straight up love letter to the genre, it's more of a commentary to the genre's fans as a whole, and how the toxic side could also cause some sort of downfall to the survival horror genre. Stefano, one of our antagonists, is an artist who wants to create art that can live on forever. He is a perfectionist, an expressionist, but he's also blinded by his own ego and insanity. He doesn't care for what pain or horror he may be causing to another person, as long as he's able to realise what his art is. It's all planned and it has to be that way. There is a moment where we see him trying to torture and turn a woman into what he calls art, and as she keeps refusing to stop screaming like he wants her to, he is then forced to cut out her tongue, going against his plan and his original image of the work. For me personally, I felt like there could possibly been a chance that he was the embodiment of toxic fans from the first game. In an industry, and most importantly a genre, where directors have to imitate their best work because that's what fans expect. Evil Within 1 wasn't enough like Resident Evil 4, or Evil Within 1 wasn't enough like Silent Hill, or even Resident Evil 2. When games try to put a spin on a formula and these fans aren't pleased in any sort of way, they're gonna let people know about it. But something that gave me this idea is his creatures, the two monsters that he throws at Sebastian during this game. First we meet the Guardian. In her introduction we meet a single woman in a red dress and long black hair, very much like traditional Eastern horrors which you would expect to see something like The Grudge or even The Ring. But then when we turn our back to her, she changes into something a lot less focused. In this collection of flesh and heads and even a buzzsaw, this may actually indicate people trying to please too many people at once. We see this happen a lot. Too many directors and game developers try to please too many fans. It turns their art and even video games into an unfocused mess of different genres, and I feel like the heads could represent the audience and the way that we could react to these mixed genres as a whole, from anger, fear, happiness and even laughter sometimes. And his second creature is the Obscura. The Obscura is way more perfected in form and even in identity, unlike the Guardian. It almost feels like it's a more focused version and even rehashed version of something that has been done before. It's Stefano's perfect monster and has clearly been perfected through mistakes and trial and error. But it could represent the toxic fans who want to just live in the heydays of survival horror, who wants every game to be like the original Resident Evils, who wants every single game to just be like PT from now on. Something that gave me this idea is because it has this camera on its head, it's able to look around corners and even get into the tightest spots to look for any imperfection to give it a reason to attack. It's clearly a perfectionist and as much of an artist as Stefano is, but also at the same time it's still a monster and has no control of its own faults. Stefano's art and creatures are sick and wrong, but he doesn't see that. He is in the understanding that capturing his victims in the present is making the perfect art, making sure they live on forever and is never misunderstood. And this goes back to Sebastian's journey, constantly going back to that bar day in, day out and not moving forward, feeling sorry for himself and repeating his self-destructive nature just by drinking and getting blackout drunk. It wasn't until Kidman was able to pull him out of this and push him forward that he really understood what he needed to do. Every now and then a game will come around and crack the perfect formula. We'll see games like Five Nights at Freddy's, Outlast, Amnesia. Hey, we'll even see games like, once again, PT come in and change the formula, but it doesn't mean we have to stick to it. It doesn't mean we have to remain in that moment and really follow that trend. But instead it's important to learn from that, keep pushing forward and not repeat ourselves, very much like Stefano's art is repeating itself until it dies. There is constant imagery throughout this game which shows Sebastian's mind refusing to move forward and getting over the past. When we enter a gas-filled sewer to find Stefano, he must descend into the unknown. When he's first plugged into STEM, he's constantly falling into isolation. When going to fight Father Theodore for the first time, we're constantly walking down this descending stairway which seems unending, which could also be a reference to Silent Hill 2. But there's also psychology behind stairwells and how we perceive them. There is a frustration that comes with taking steps and literal steps as well. Sebastian for most of the early game descends into a never-ending stairwell, and these make a constant appearance throughout the game itself. He isn't making any progress in overcoming his guilt and mistakes from the past, and what he believed happened to Lily in the past was all his fault. Constantly being reminded that he is trapped in this world, he has to learn to accept what happened and move on. As I mentioned earlier, Father Theodore represents the past, and he uses past trauma and even events to scare Sebastian into not getting any closer to Lily. And when Theodore shows Sebastian Lily for the first time, he asks him to embrace her and to accept what happens. And as she moves towards him, Sebastian only moves 3 steps back. He is only proving to Theodore and even himself that he isn't ready to let go of what happened, and he's not ready to accept the guilt that he's placed on himself isn't deserved. And there's a really strong message there that I think applies to everyone. Letting go of traumas of the past and understanding that we make mistakes and it's okay to learn from them is a very important message, and I feel like it's great to put it inside this game. Do I feel like Father Theodore represents anything to do with the fans this time around, or even the toxic community within the horror genre? Not at all. I actually feel like he represents the embodiment of the minds of the developers at Tango Software, understanding that maybe they've made mistakes in the first game and they had to understand its issues. Instead of running away from the evil within and trying to forget about the mistakes of the past, they faced it head on and corrected everything that they did wrong the first time round. There is actually a presence in this game which is entirely optional. This spirit goes by the name of Anima. She manifests to remind Sebastian of his past and the events of what happened in Evil Within 1 and Beacon. She could possibly be the manifestation of our doubts and habits on which we fall back on to make ourselves feel comfortable as people during depressive times. When we're depressed, we often find ourselves being isolated and wanting to be left alone because we believe that's what makes us feel safe. When we want to eat a whole tub of Ben & Jerry's because we believe that's what makes us happy, or even sometimes when we hurt ourselves because we believe that we deserve it, and that is exactly what gets us back into sanity. But with her and how she can be the manifestation of depression, she often sings Claire de Lune, a song that within this game series we often relate to being safe. It's the sound of our safe house. It's the sound of that false sense of insecurity that Anima brings with her. Anima is also a term used by a psychologist, Carl Jung, which he describes the anima as the inner feminine side to all men. And this may explain why she is unkillable to Sebastian, as she is literally a part of him, trying to make him understand the more compassionate side that he needs to connect with. Instead of facing every single challenge with a gunfight or beating up someone in a pub through anger, he has to understand compassion, and he has to learn to let go of the past and realise that sometimes he has to reconnect with himself to be able to move forward. And that could explain why the last optional chance you get to meet her is called Chapter 11, Reconnecting.
I will get out, but without you.
There is a death of a character in this game which causes Sebastian to realise that it wasn't his fault that she died, and therefore it wasn't his fault that Lily could have died in the past. And with this newfound perspective on life, he must go face Theodore just one more time and not let the guilt get to him. And from this point in the game, we only see Sebastian heading upstairs. The game's imagery is entirely switched on us, and it doesn't even tell you when this is going to happen. It's a nice subtle change and you don't think about it. Of course there has been stairways where you go up and down, but that's only contextual. But any major stairway which may seem unending is heading upwards from now on. And it shows that Sebastian is taking the right steps to become the person he really needs to be. So when he confronts Theodore for one more time, he throws Lily at him again and asks him to embrace her just like he did before. And instead of moving backwards, he's the first one to take the step forwards. He's the first one to embrace her and understand that her death wasn't his fault. Theodore has created a cult in this game, and he has a motto that you see pop up. Create a better reality. Create the reality you want, not the one they want for you. And in the first video I discussed the moment where he must kill the sadist, the keeper, and of course Lara from the first game, and how this could indicate saying goodbye to the horror tropes of the past and moving on to better things in the future. This scene was really special in this game, being able to lay out what people demand and even expect from the genre and killing them off one by one, but at the same time paying respect to the icons of the past, letting people know that there's always going to be a place for the Nemesis types, or Silent Hill inspired monsters, and of course cheap shock horror and violence, but maybe moving on from this and discovering a new identity in horror is what the genre could possibly need right now. But to do that, we must first let go of what is demanded from the past. And that issue alone is exactly why Evil Within 1 had its major flaws. It was too busy trying to reuse the cookie cutter layouts of Resident Evil 4's and even Silent Hill style spiritual successors that fans wanted, but at the same time really wanted to be its own identity, but of course it couldn't do both and juggle them well. And they knew that for the sequel, and they had to put down that formula of the past and work out where to go for the future.
Can't let her take Lily.
Sebastian finds his wife, and it turns out she is very much like him. She blames herself for what happened in the past, but has accepted that only she is the one who's able to save her and look after her within Union, making sure that she will never be unhappy and scared ever again. Myra chose not to grow from her loss and mistakes in the past, but instead embrace and become exactly what she was fighting against. Myra could be the representation to what happens to any artist when they fall into line to what the critics and even toxic fans expect from them. Imagine if they had made Evil Within 2 and it was just like Resident Evil 4, just like the fans wanted from the first game. It would have easily have been forgotten and would have just fallen back into the replicas or even the imitations of the past. And playing it too safe is a very common practice, and it can lead to something never being able to find its own identity. But Myra chose to stay put, and she chose to live within the fear of the past, the present, and of course the future. She has become everything that Sebastian decided not to be. Pushing her forward very much like Kidman did for Sebastian, he now has to focus on Myra and getting her out of that fear and helping her live her life again with Sebastian and Lily. After killing the monsters of the past and defeating Father Theodore, he awakens to find himself in some sort of limbo. Buildings destroyed and white sand-like substances paves the landscapes. There's no violence, there's no jump scares, just the soundtrack, calm and almost haunting in its absence of danger. And if we're able to say goodbye to the tropes of the past, and if we're able just to let go for a moment, this could truly be the beginning of what we could craft out of the horror genre. Instead of extending and rehashing of what already exists, we instead build on the foundations of the past, and most importantly make something new and individual in an empty landscape around us. The symbology of Sebastian climbing continues here, but not in fear this time to save Lily, but instead in hopes of being able to persuade his wife so they can live a life together again. And very much like Sebastian did with Lily, Myra refuses to move forward to Sebastian and instead moves away. She isn't willing to accept that they could be together again, and then she isn't willing to accept that she should let Lily go and live a life of possible fear and making mistakes. And because of this, she becomes corrupted and Sebastian must defeat just one last demon and learn to accept Myra's choice. Learning that it's okay to lose something sometimes and learning to let go of the ones you love. When Sebastian finally finds Lily and is able to embrace her and actually hold her to walk away, we see that doll again from the beginning of the game. It's fixed this time, there's no tear in his neck. We see him watching them walk away, like he's being able to leave that version of him behind, and he no longer needs anyone else to take care of him because he is now a new man. The Evil Within 2 may be one of the best examples in recent years in becoming your own, and staying strong to something that you believe in and understanding growth and letting go. It creates a world and experience that I feel like I won't forget anytime soon. It doesn't just let go of the first game's mistakes and errors, but instead is willing to accept what happened. It continues to carry over many references from the first game and even salutes and pays respects to its beginnings. But throughout Evil Within 2, we're constantly reminded to appreciate the art. It's great to see directors like Mikami give newcomers a chance to tackle their worlds because it created a team and combination that helped this series find its footing, and it will hopefully be explored for years to come. So many times do we see games do well and then every game around it just wants to hop onto that bandwagon and try and be that next game. But instead of Tango Games being pushed aside because of a lackluster reception from the first game, they stood their ground and they knew their footing, and they began to build on the failures of the past. And they showed the fans, the world, and even me that there is a place in this world for games like The Evil Within. I really do hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you have a chance to explore Evil Within 2 for yourself, and of course I will see you at the next checkpoints. Thank you for watching, bye bye.